Welcome to TGS, Transform, Grow, Succeed. This channel is about your work as a caring professional and the ideas that we can share to elevate and expand what we do so that those we serve get the very best of what we have to offer. And today I am thrilled to introduce my friend and colleague, Capella Hauer. And Capella is the Associate Executive Director of the School Social Work Association of America, SSWAA. And Capella earned her master's in clinical social work from New Mexico Highlands University in 2015, and has spent much of her career working alongside elementary age children and the educators who support them. Capella is a national certified school social worker and a passionate advocate for trauma-informed practices in youth mental health. And through articles that Capella has written, like Finding Power in Anxious Feelings and Organization Tips for School Social Workers, Capella brings both heart and clarity to the field. And just in my own personal just connections over the years with Capella, I can absolutely vouch for that. The heart and clarity are tremendous. And I would add some passion to that, which I have a feeling that we'll get a chance to elicit in just a little bit. So Capella, in your current role at SSWAA, Capella, you're focusing on building inclusive spaces for school social workers to grow, connecting professionals with the resources, training, and advocacy that they need to thrive. And Capella, did I get that right?
Yeah, sounds great to me.
All right, excellent. Well, Capella, and I have known you over the years just to be an exceptionally caring person that's just a fierce advocate for the kids and youth that you serve. And I'm just wondering, I guess this actually I really don't know. Would you tell me a bit about yourself and what inspired you to pursue school social work in the beginning?
Yeah, that is funny that we haven't talked about this actually. I feel like over the years that we've known each other, we probably should have gotten into it. Um, well, I had always enjoyed doing anything volunteer oriented when I was younger and in high school. And I worked at domestic violence shelters, animal shelters, and um, I was a little hesitant to go to college because I wasn't quite positive what I wanted to do. But then as I started doing that work in my free time, I just fell in love with it. And I knew that's absolutely the career that I needed. And so I went into social work. And like you mentioned, I went to social works or university in New Mexico. And all social work degrees for your undergrad and your master's, you need to have internships, right? And where I was going to university was very rural. So, it wasn't like Phoenix or New York. And so one of the opportunities that opened up that I felt most called to was working in schools. And that's because I love working with kids. Um, and so I never completely pictured myself working in a school. I mean, I always loved playing teacher with my cousins when I was growing up, but I never thought that that was going to happen for me. And then as soon as I found myself in that educational space, everything just kind of clicked. And that's where I've spent my entire social work career is in schools, and I absolutely love it.
And so that's really interesting because you love working in schools, you love working with school age children for sure. But being a teacher was never something that you really kind of felt called to in the same way as being a school social worker, which is really interesting because I got a juicy question to ask you in a second. But maybe we could start pulling that apart now. Like, what? Never really thought about being a teacher, but something about being a school social worker, though, absolutely. This is exactly it.
Yeah, I think what pulled me more to social work is just the idea that it's so versatile. So we have social workers in prisons, in hospitals, in, therapy, just doing client therapy, groups, schools, like you can find in libraries. Social workers are everywhere. And
Wait, in the
so
library?
that was a, yes,
School social
yeah,
The social workers work in libraries.
yes.
Oh my goodness, we need to have the longest, most leisurely coffee break ever. I am so excited. That's new learning. I'm embarrassed and excited. But okay, so they're everywhere. So there's versatility to it, and that's what attracted to you to that kind of service because you were doing all of that just as a child and youth yourself, and now you can make a career
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
School is a very specific kind of social work, though.
Totally. And I absolutely adore all my teacher friends and have mad respect for them. And I also am not great at things like math. So, for me to be teaching things like math, I don't know that anyone really wants that. So, teaching was never really something on my radar, but it is interesting that I found myself in education anyway.
You found yourself in education anyway. And it's just I couldn't have asked you to have just the most perfect segue into this question because I'm gonna ask you a question that I hope doesn't sound too simple, but it really intrigued me just when we were talking at the conference in February. Uh, in your view, and I guess in the view of the School Social Work Association of America, what is the role of a school social worker?
We're coming in hot with the big questions right off the bat. I love it.
Well, tell me, well, how about why don't
I,
you just answer this one first? Why is that a hot question?
well, I think because I've been in it, so it makes it a little bit hard to answer succinctly. I think and that just might be me personally. I have a hard time putting it succinctly, but I think the best way that I could put it, if I were to put it in a sentence and then I'll expand, um, but school social workers are the link between home, schools, and community. And so, or the bridge, the link, the whatever you want to call it. And really, if you think about being that bridge between those three big areas, right? You're the home, the family, the school, and the community. Anything that falls in there, that's where we come in. Um, so there's so many different things that we can do. And what's really interesting about school social work is it looks different across the US. And so someone might be watching this in Illinois and they might know a school social worker and say, I know my school social worker does all these things. And then someone in Nevada might say, well, my school social worker does all these things. Um, we have school social workers that only do McKinney-Vento, right? They only work with houseless youth, and that's their primary role, their main focus. But again, similar to social work as a career in its own, school social work is so versatile. And what I really love about it is you get to apply that social worker to what the community really needs, right? So if a school community really just needs someone who is the houseless liaison who works for McKinney-Vento, we can do that. If we have someone who is really needing to do, we love our little triangle. If we need a social worker that needs to support with the 3 tiers for behavior support, we can do that. School social workers are phenomenal leaders on campuses. And it can be, something as intense and big as doing crisis prevention or intervention or helping find a kid shoes so they can participate in PE. It really just runs the whole gambit. And that's why I feel it's a little bit hard to narrow down. Um, but I think with SWA, they would kind of break it down into categories, right? So we support mental health, we support school climate, and that can look like different initiatives to really build school climate. Um, we provide social development, so you might see a school social worker going into classrooms, doing social or emotional lessons. And then we also have amazing social workers who support and even are specialized in special education services. So again, there's so much. And when you hear these things, I really hope teachers and administrators are listening, because when you hear all the ways that social workers can support, I mean, I know I'm bragging on my own profession, but especially with everything that our education and our educators are kind of tackling these days, who doesn't want a social worker? Who couldn't benefit from one, right? It's a lot.
Oh
It's
no,
a lot.
without a doubt. I appreciate that it is so much, honestly. And this is one of those things too, when you think about asking what is a deceptively simple question, right? Like, what is the role of the school social worker? It sounds like nearly everything the child might need minus curriculum.
Yeah,
Really, when it comes down to it, the
absolutely.
only thing a social worker wouldn't do would be to try to teach something that they might have a test on later. Would that be accurate to say?
Yeah, and I would even, plug that, say they have a test later that day, but they struggle with anxiety. So I'm going to step in and support with that and teach them some coping skills to make sure they rock it. So absolutely, I'm not going to directly teach curriculum, but the work that school social workers do absolutely have a direct impact on students' performance and ability to participate in class.
And so when I was just thinking about that too, because you talked about it could really be literally anything. And one of the things I just want to just take a quick aside to talk about, like here in Pima County in Tucson, Arizona, there's this amazing organization called Youth on Their Own, YOTO for short is what we call it around here. And their job, they do one thing, and they are very disciplined about only doing that one thing, and that's to help houseless youth graduate high school. That's what they do. And one of the things it was just such a privilege to do was just to have a chance to speak with some youth that sometimes didn't have it, often didn't have a permanent safe place to live, going through school. And one of the things that they all told me was that they wish they had known what McKinney-Vento was a long time ago. And it's something that as educators we always know, but one student said,
Yeah.
how did they say it? I'm paraphrasing because it's been a while, but it was a really delicious way they paraphrased it. They said, you know what? I had to go to an assembly where they had like the chess club and the drama club and the football team, and I knew how to sign up for all of those things. I mean, why not just say, hey, if this applies to you, go talk to me? That would have been really helpful. Instead, it took me years to find out that I had access to all these supports. And wow, what a perfect job for a school social worker, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And there's a reason why it's mandatory, training for teachers and school staff, but you bring up a good point. Like how can we push that even further and make sure that it's a resource that our students know about, especially those who are teenagers or, maybe at the age where they're not at home
Mhm.
as often, like, are not necessarily talking about our kindergarteners. But yeah, why wouldn't we educate them on that as well and those resources that are available? Absolutely.
Just thinking about that, just that the principle of equity anyway is like if we're gonna create a program for somebody, the folks that the program is for should probably be involved in the conversation somehow. It's just
Mm.
something that in any case I would love to see more of that, and I am happy to support that if any of my listeners are doing something like that in their spaces for sure. So the role
Yeah.
the role of the school social worker can be just almost anything, and we're going to take a break right now. So I want to explore that just a little bit because there's some spicy follow ups on that kind of thing, right? So let's take a break for just a second. And when we come back, we'll continue to just have a delicious conversation with Capella Hauer, the Associate Executive Director of the School Social Worker Association of America.
School social workers provide support to all students, specifically in areas of social emotional learning and mental health needs. They are uniquely trained to integrate the school, community, and family context into interventions and resource referrals. School social work interventions reduce barriers to learning, enabling students to be physically, mentally, and emotionally present and ready to learn in class. Are you an administrator looking to grow or expand your social work program? Our free program development toolkit is designed to provide administrators and supervisors with useful tools to both inform the development of new school social work programs or to enhance existing programs. Or perhaps you're a listening school social worker looking for more opportunities and community. If so, welcome home. SWAA provides professional development opportunities, a network of supportive, like-minded professionals, and tools and resources for our members and not yet members. Whether you are a school social worker, an administrator, or a supervisor, we have something for you. Come visit us at SWA.org to see how we can unite to ignite lasting change within our classrooms, campuses, and communities.
Well, welcome back, everyone. We were talking with Capella Hauer, who's the Associate Executive Director of the School Social Worker Association of America, and it just asked a real simple question, right? What is the role of the school social worker? And it could really be anything that a child needs to learn and grow that's outside of the curriculum. So it is a huge kind of thing that everything from finding glasses to supports for our houseless students to all kinds of things that a school social worker can do to teaching coping skills for anxiety, for goodness sake. So and in my own experience, there's literally nothing that I've seen a school social worker not be great at. And so when it comes down to it, though, being good at all of those things is amazing. And while a school social worker could certainly do anything, any one of those things very, very well and support kids and youth and help them learn and grow in the best possible way, I wonder sometimes if it could just feel like a lot and hard to do like every one of those things. It's just the size of the need is often greater than the number of people that we've got to meet them. How has this shown up in your experience?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think any educator who's tuning in on this can absolutely empathize with how overwhelming and how difficult the educational field is right now, right? And our school social workers, of course, feel that too. Um, what comes to mind when you ask me that question is that first of all, I think many social workers go into the field because we are really good at crisis response, right? And so we are the kind of individuals who are able to walk into a crisis, remain, calm, effective, and get done what needs to get done. And within that kind of comes like really prioritizing like what needs to be done immediately, what can wait, and what is like a tomorrow or next week kind of issue. And so I think just having that ability to almost shuffle a list in your head is so critical for a social worker. And I think too, along with that comes boundaries, right? So I I'll say like when I was still working on campuses, I might be in the middle of like a very real immediate crisis, right? And that's going to be my only focus until the crisis is resolved and it's over. And, it just so happens I might be walking down the breezeway in the middle of recess, and a teacher comes up to me and says, "Hey, I want to talk to you about this IEP meeting later today." And, first of all, building those relationships so that you can do this, but having boundaries with the people around you, students, adults, to be able to say, at this moment, I can't be available for you. Let me check back in, right? Or however you as an individual do that thing. But having those boundaries is so important, and working with your administrators to figure out where those boundaries might be more realistic, right? So some of that, social workers are notorious for not advocating very well for ourselves, but it is so critical that we do. And part of that is working with our administrators to say, like, what are your expectations of me? What are your boundaries for me? Where is some spaces where I might have some leeway? And also, how can we talk about maybe, you know, reducing my caseload, or, because our national association, SSWAA, they recommend one social worker to 250 students, and that's general education students. There is no school that I know of in the country that has that ratio, right?
Literally none that I have never.
None.
Maybe once briefly for one time, for a very short time, but it didn't last, that's for sure.
And it probably wasn't 250 general education students, right? Usually, if we see that ratio or smaller, it's for a student population that has much more intensive needs. So, but anyway, like work, advocate for yourself and figure out how can you manage all of those demands. And then another part of it is leaning on other supports too. Like I worked with a phenomenal special education teacher and a phenomenal psychologist, and I would lean on my supports and try to figure out, okay, I'm seeing so many concerns come up in this certain area. How can we address it maybe school wide, so that it's not me solving all these mini things that really are all collected together here. Um, so I think those are some of the ways that you can try to lighten the load. But I mean, just social work in general, it is a high stress job, of course, but then also high reward too, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's just any educator listening can certainly emphasize with that. That just that the needs are always bigger than the capacity, or at least it always feels like the needs are always bigger than capacity, and certainly are. If what needs to happen is a 1 to 250 ratio for school social workers, then there's no way that there's any school social worker that is able to do 100% of what a school social worker could do. And one of the things that's just
Yeah.
really striking me too is that I've been a classroom teacher, but I've also been a principal. And so, and just in thinking about, I don't think I've ever had those conversations with a school counselor or school social worker. And now I'm really wishing that I had just the sense of, okay, so I've got an idea of what I was looking for when I hired the school social worker in the first place. But I also don't necessarily have this. I not even necessarily. I don't have the same training, skills, or experience that the
Mm,
school social worker does. So I don't even necessarily know, where to even start with even talking about like what expectations should be. And wow, a conversation sure would help with that, huh?
right. And like for me as a brand new school social worker, I was completely unaware of some of the restrictions administration might be under or pressures or even just the historical context of that school or that community. And so, I mean, building that relationship with your teachers and your administrator is so crucial, and really being able to have those vulnerable conversations of, here are my gaps in knowledge, here are my expectations, share with me yours, and where can we kind of figure this out so we can work best as a team, right?
Yeah. And I'm just imagining that a brand new school social worker hired for the first time, that requires a lot of bravery, honestly, to step into that conversation with your boss for the very first time. And it's just making me think too that there might be just another opportunity for veteran social workers and also just administrators who are listening to just know that these conversations are important, and creating space in a safe, warm, inviting way sure goes a long way for that too.
Yeah,
When
yeah, absolutely.
I'm almost wondering too, just because the role of the social worker is so diverse, it is so expansive, it could really encompass anything that a school social worker might be good at. In your experience, how do school social workers shine? Is it because they're in a community, they discover the needs, and they figure out kind of how to meet them, or is it because they have a skill set that they know they're really good at and are kind of just disciplined about sticking to the stuff that they know they're good at? Is it kind of like a blend of those two?
Mm, that's a good question. So there is like a national model in which ideally school social workers would be working within. And I think kind of the sweet spot comes when that social worker is able to adapt to their environment and really analyze and see what the needs of the community are, which is what we're trained to do, right? Is to really look at that person in the environment, the environmental impact on that person's behavior, their ability to learn, the culture of the school. All of that are things that we're trained in, whether it's specific to a school or not. That's just our background. And then finding where those needs are and also where the strengths are, and using the strengths of that individual social worker to really shine in those different areas. So I think it is a little bit of a mix of both. And my hope too would be like, just, and this applies for any kind of professional, the areas that you might feel a little bit uneasy about or anxious about, just kind of try to slowly step into that space. Um, and you'll be really surprised at what happens and how you're able to grow as a professional. I know for me, when I was starting out, I was a brand new graduate, and for, so stereotypical millennial, but I had such a hard time calling guardians on the phone. Like, it gave me heart palpitations. And for whatever reason, of all the things that I do as a school social worker, which there's some very hard things that I have to do, for whatever reason, picking up that phone was so difficult for me. And over the years, I practiced, I did it, and one of the best things I did for myself was forced myself to sit down at the beginning of every school year and call those guardians, those important adults, before, at least 2 weeks into the school year. And then that way I was always starting off with a positive relationship, and it made me feel so much more at ease, but more importantly, like it made them feel at ease. And then that way it didn't feel as awkward or uncomfortable calling. But anyways, total side note, but I think, you have your areas that you shine, but great things can happen too when you slowly step into those areas where you might be a little anxious about.
Well, and I think it makes a lot of sense. I don't think it's a side note at all, right? Because it's like there's certain things as just by virtue of the role that we've got. If you're a school social worker, you are absolutely going to be calling, a home grown up of the kids that you work with at some point, for goodness sakes. And not everybody really likes being on the phone. I mean, I know people that would rather chew glass and order a pizza, for goodness sakes, and a lot of these conversations, yeah, right, and I think I'm slowly becoming a bit more like that, but but generally speaking, when it comes to families, if there's an issue, I'm not going to email. I'm not going to wait 10 seconds. I'm going to get on the phone right away and call, and I don't have any problem diving into
Yeah.
that. But that doesn't mean everybody does.
Mhm.
Is what I'm hearing is kind of leaning into the stuff that is important but really hard to do, and maybe even just in a practical way, making sure that's the first thing that you do.
Mhm.
That it sounds like that was something that just, whether it's phone calls or scheduling IEP meetings or calling the food bank about whatever it could be, it sounds like that might be just really important stuff for all of us.
Yeah. And it might depend on who you are. Like I think my personality is always that, you eat your vegetables and then dessert. And so I'm always in that train of mind of like do the harder thing first
Yep.
and then do the fun thing. So I mean, for other people, for you, it might be completely different. I know one principal I worked with, he knew that having those connections were so important, and he knew himself well enough that he knows he gets super distracted with emails and just admin tasks. And so, in order to work with his brain, just he wrote a note and he put it in his calendar every day for these 2 hours. I'm walking around campuses and I'm connecting with teachers, right? And then that way it was like it's a fun little checklist for him. He knows it's super important, and he knows that once he's in it and doing it, it makes him feel great. So for everyone it's a little bit different, but
Uh, Well, I think that's it's important just to think about. It's just like what really is important, and it probably, email is one of those things that pretends to be important, for the most part. Like, it's almost never
yeah.
that big a deal. There's a thing or two maybe, that happens. I love it as a communication tool, but I'm not going to let it take any time away from the reason why I do this work, for goodness sakes. So I think that
Yeah.
it also is kind of neat. And you said something, talked about just like tips for anxious students, or just things that you felt anxiety about too. And this is just another, wow, there's a little bit off topic too again, but this is my fault for sure. But when it comes to anxiety, I've recently started to offer some PD, and supporting students with anxiety, mainly because I've done a lot of work around creating inclusive classrooms for students with ADHD. And what's another common, alongside of ADHD, condition that a lot of kids have, is anxiety. And I was realizing, oh, well,
Mhm.
anxiety is also a thing. What do we do about that? Oh, I don't know. Haven't really looked into it. And so now I have, and if there are some things that seem to work really well, like cognitive behavioral therapy, some real scaffolded exposures to triggers, those kinds of things seem to work really, really well. But I'm just wondering, what, from your perspective, if you could wave a magic wand and get all educators in the United States to do something to support students with anxiety, who, by the way, that's about 10% of school age youth, which, I was talking to
Mhm.
educators about it, they think that number's low. They think that
Yeah.
10% is probably actually much more than that in their own lived experience. And so if you go, here we go. Here's the question: if you could wave a magic wand just to get all educators in the United States to do something to better support students with anxiety, what would be the thing you'd want them to start with?
Oof. I'm actually also really interested in your answer on this,
Mm-hmm.
because one thing, and I don't know if this is the right answer, but one thing for me that I felt like really had a huge positive impact on my ability to work with students with anxiety is the fact that I also have anxiety. And so for me, the thought that comes to my mind when you ask that is asking educators to learn about anxiety, ADHD, whatever these things are, because it is really hard to completely empathize with a student going through that if you have no clue what some of the symptoms and experiences of having that are, right? I don't like, what are your thoughts? Would you agree on that, or would you say something different?
Oh, I mean, there's a million things from the research literature for sure, but I think for honestly exactly that. That's and it's just not even that, but even the research literature is saying that one of the most important things that we can do as educators to better support students with anxiety, and my hunch is all neurodiverse students, is just learn about
Yeah.
it. And it really comes down to step one is learn about anxiety. And one of the things that really got is I started kind of in this journey of, I think I've read like 57 research articles and a few books on anxiety at this point. And it talks to lots of folks who, say that they live with anxiety to some degree or another. But one of the things that really came to mind is, like those physical symptoms that will often come up, just
Mm.
the tense muscles or stomach issues or things like that, that felt that most school adults tend to be really dismissive of that oh, the
Yeah.
kid is faking it, they don't need to go to the nurse. And what folks with anxiety, and I would curious to know, this is your lived experience to some degree perhaps, that folks with anxiety have told me that I am not faking this, it is not in my head, this, my heart is racing, there's are physical things that are happening here. And that is another thing that we just really need to take seriously, in addition to the social and emotional part of it. But I don't think I would have even really thought about that except by reading, honestly, and talking to people and following a
Feeling.
whole lot of Instagram accounts of people with anxiety too. That's a great way to learn, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and you bring up another good point too, is especially with I mean, with a lot of neurodiverse, but in my experience with anxiety, there's a lot of psychosomatic symptoms that come up. So again, building a great relationship with your nurse and making sure your school nurse has that kind of education and understanding of some of those psychosomatic symptoms that might be coming. Um, so that they can alert you and say, so and so has been coming into my office for 3 days straight now with a stomach ache. That can kind of help narrow down a little bit what's going on. Um, and yeah, I think education's a big part of it. And then I think about having a mental health professional on campuses, of course, would be a massive help. And then ideally having that professional be teaching lessons on social and emotional. And I mean, because I don't know about you, but I don't really remember getting taught in grade school very much about our emotions. And I think if I had had that education, I probably would have been able to maybe not fully comprehend or recognize exactly, but I would have had better coping skills and understanding of how to control certain symptoms much earlier on, right? I don't know if that's a similar experience for you. Um, but and then another thing I think about too, Tim, and I think you do a lot of work with this too, is just creating classrooms that are inclusive of all all students, no matter what they're working with in
Yeah.
any kind of capacity, that universal design for learning, and just having spaces where everyone can succeed and learn, and not just one particular type or neurotypical type of individual, right?
Yeah. And we've got classrooms that are absolutely built for neurotypical students for the most part in most places. And it is exciting to see just how many educators are choosing not to necessarily do that all the time anymore, and are really stepping into
Mm-hmm.
their power as educators, and crafting these different learning spaces. And how wonderful would it be to have an amazing school social worker to be a partner in that? Because for goodness sakes, I know that for me that has always been the case. Those school counselors, the school social workers, the school psychs, who have different kinds of expertise in their areas, but just know things that I just don't know and weren't trained in as a teacher, and it was just exceptionally helpful there. Well, we talked
Yeah.
about an awful lot here. I just think that's neat. I just want to just kind of encapsulate that anxiety thing and make sure I'm doing it right. I promise listeners that this is not something we talked about ahead of time, but we both agree on this, that if you want to better support your students with anxiety, step one is follow 10 accounts of people that have anxiety and talk about it on social media, or read a research article, get a book, or whatever kind of learning feels good for you. But or honestly, do all three. That's what I do. But it is really, really helpful, because there's things that, some from time to time, anxiety is something that shows up in my life, but not the same way as it does for my oldest, who really struggles to do things like order a boba tea at her very favorite boba tea place with the nicest lady in the world, who is the same lady every single time and absolutely adores my kid. But for some reason, my daughter is cannot say a word, and her order has not changed in years. So
Yeah.
it's just one of those things where I didn't understand how on earth could that be, for goodness sakes, until I started reading. And I think that's neat. Is that kind of, I know that probably our listeners are looking for a tip or two, but I do think that is tip number one, is learn.
Yeah, and I think especially if you're working with a particular age group, learning about the most common, right,
Yeah.
symptoms for that age group, right? It might show up very differently in adult males than it would in for a little girl who's in second grade, right? So kind of understanding how that anxiety develops and changes through the lifehood as well.
And then bonus points, and then not really bonus points, but honestly, absolutely essential points for finding information about like how this shows up in folks that necessarily don't look like you and me, because a lot of this research too is doesn't always take into account things like race and gender and sexual orientation and gender expression and all those kinds of stuff too. So it's
Absolutely,
it's huge.
absolutely.
There's so much to read, but a lot to do. Well, that sure is a lot. And there goes my light. Let's go ahead and take a break. And I think when we come back, let's have a final thought from Capella Hauer, Associate Executive Director of the School Social Worker Association of America. And actually, can I just ask, Associate Executive Director means that there's more than one of you, right?
There's one of me, and then we have an
I'm sorry.
executive
Of
director.
course, there's only one of you, but there's another
Well,
person in that role. I'm so sorry. That was a silly thing for me to say. Of course, there's only one amazing Capella Hauer for sure. But there's your leadership model is more than one.
we our organization is phenomenal, and if I can brag on us for a moment, we only have a staff of 4,
Mm-hmm.
and we run a national organization. It's I'm always impressed by our team. And yeah, so it's our executive director, myself, and then director of programs and a director of marketing. And we make a lot happen with the 4 of us and with our board who supports us.
I mean, a tremendous amount
Absolutely.
happen. The amazing school social workers and that are here in the United States, and of course for all of your members too. And I'll tell you what, I know that I always am an active participant in my own professional organizations, and I can only imagine that it would be such a support to be part of the School Social Worker Association of America as well. Well, let's take a break, and then when we come back, we'll have a final thought from Capella. Quick question for you. What's the biggest challenge you face when implementing behavior support systems? Is it teacher buy-in? Is it finding time for training? Is it making it work for students? The biggest reason behavior supports fail is because we make them more complicated than they have to be. Simpler works better for staff, students, and families. Are you looking for ways to streamline what you're already doing? Drop your answer in the comments, and if you want real solutions, you can give me a call. Welcome back, everyone. It's been absolutely fantastic to talk to you today, Capella. You've been a personal, professional friend for many, many years, and I got to know new stuff about you today. That was so cool. But I'm wondering, just given all of the ground that we've covered, and just given that you are the Associate Executive Director of a national organization of social workers that represents people across these United States, I'm wondering, what final thought might you have for us?
I think, we talked in the beginning about all the things that school social workers do. And, our organization right now, we're doing a national awareness campaign, um, because there just isn't a lot of knowledge out there about what school social workers do. And that's coming from all directions. It's coming from administrators, legislators, teachers, even school social workers themselves, right? And so that's why we're doing this big national awareness campaign, and we're sharing it across the nation. I myself am sharing it with legislators. And I think the thing that I really want to drive home is especially for our educators who are so tired, right? We have this mass exodus of teachers and administrators who are just really struggling. I really just want people to know that school social workers exist. If you haven't heard of us or haven't been, blessed to be in a school with a school social worker, we are here. And our jobs really, when it comes down to it, is helping all of our students be able to show up in class ready to learn and ready to engage with their curriculum and with their teacher. That looks so many different ways, right? We make amazing things happen. We can do so many things to get that student in that place. Um, and I think about my teacher friends and some of the things that they're going through and what's being put on their plate. And it honestly, it breaks my heart and it hurts my heart. And I wish I could just gift them 5 social workers because I really truly believe that so much of that would help with, you know, the concerns with lack of student engagement, students being on their cell phone during class all the time, or, chronic absenteeism. That's another huge thing that has really skyrocketed since COVID. There are just so many different things that we're all trying to battle, and they're big battles. Um, and in our bottom of our hearts, we just want to support and help kids learn, all kids. So I think just a little plug, if you'll let me, Tim. We have some really great resources on our website, sswaa.org. And there's tons of art, like one pagers on there that kind of help you figure out, like, what is a social worker, how to advocate for one, how to fund for one, because I know that's a big question for administrators, is how to actually get funding for them. And I just really encourage everyone to, if you have a social worker and you're lucky to have a social worker, fight for them because they'll fight for you. And if you don't have one, see what kind of magic you can make happen, because I promise they'll make you and your students' lives at least a sliver easier.
Well, and in more than a sliver, in my own experience, has been grateful for the school social workers that I've worked with as a classroom teacher and certainly as a school administrator. And just in our work together over the years, I know for a fact that we have definitely helped educators' lives be easier and more effective, and ultimately the students that we serve too. Well, just thank you, Capella, so much for being here today. And just thank you for sharing your experience with us, our listeners. And just to our listeners, I hope you enjoyed our show. And I definitely hope that you reach out to Capella with your thoughts in our conversation in the comment section. And definitely check out the resources at www.sswaa.org. If you're not a school social worker, check them out anyway. There's a lot in there that absolutely impacts the work that we do. And the more that we know, the better and more effective we're going to be. You can reach me at tgseducationalconsulting.com. And until next time, and as always, may you have as many opportunities to be as generous and kind to yourself as you are with those that you serve.